I've entitled this series on the book of Ruth, Faithful Lives in Faithful Times. It is one of the most beautiful and powerful stories of faith in all of Scripture. But like most significant stories of faith, it takes place against a backdrop of unimaginable hardship and suffering and loss. After all, that's what makes a story of faith, doesn't it? When Job had lost everything of earthly value and meaning in his life, he fell to the ground in worship. And he declared, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return or depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." If he had said those words surrounded by all of his wealth and blessing, all of his material possessions, his beautiful children and family, all of his physical and relational and material wealth, those would have been hollow words. But spoken after having lost it all, incomprehensible, unimaginable, words that echo through the ages. Later, when even his health was taken from him, his life reduced to sitting on an ash heap, scraping his sores, his wife in ridicule turns to him and says, "Job, curse God and die." In other words, your life is not even worth living. "Punch out, Job," she said to him. To which Job replied, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Again, if he had spoke that from the top of the heap, it would have meant nothing. But from the ash heap, it meant everything. Shortly before Betsy ten Boom died in the concentration camp at Ravensbrück, Germany, having, along with her sister Corrie, lost everything of value and meaning to them. Their elderly father, with whom they had spent their lives, their beautiful lifetime home off of the city square in Haarlem, Holland, their family watch business, their community, their friends, their ministry, their rich and full life. Shortly before she died, emaciated and ill, she looked Corrie in the eyes and she said, "Oh, Corrie, we must tell them. We must tell them that there is no pit so deep that he is not deeper still." Again, if she had spoken those words from the confines of her idyllic life in that beautiful city of Haarlem, they would have meant nothing. But from the confines of a Nazi concentration camp, after all that they had been through and all that they had endured, those are words that echo through the ages of faith and history. Their faithfulness was revealed against the backdrop of their faithfulness. By the very circumstances of unimaginable suffering and loss, that is what makes their lives and their words so stunning and so powerful. It is against the background of verses 1 through 5, that opening paragraph of Ruth, that verses 6 through 21 of that first chapter stand in such stark contrast and stunning beauty. Naomi and Elimelech had been driven from their generational home in Bethlehem of Judah by the economic hardships of war and famine, forced to become refugees, foreigners in the land of Moab, which was not friendly territory for a Jew. But they had done what many do. They had worked hard and they had made a life for themselves and for their two sons. Unfortunately, tragedy struck again with the untimely death of their husband and father Elimelech. But even then, as great as that blow was, all was not lost. Both of the sons took Moabite wives. There was still hope and prospect of families and of a future and a place where Naomi could belong and be cared for in the years ahead. It was not ideal, but it was hopeful. By the way, I didn't mention this last week, but there was nothing in the law that forbade their marriage to Moabite women. Deuteronomy 23:3 specifically forbade any Moabite male or his descendants from being admitted to the assembly of Israel, owing to the inhospitality and the curse that they had sought to bring upon the people of Israel coming out of the Exodus. That's what had been prescribed by Moses. But the law did not forbid marriage to a Moabite woman, nor was a Moabite woman excluded from the assembly if married to a Jewish male, especially if she was a proselyte to Judaism. But then tragedy struck a third time. Both of Naomi's sons, in successive order, also died, neither having yet fathered a child. Hard to measure the impact and implications of that tragedy. That made the prospects of Naomi's life in Moab absolutely nil. Nil. At the death of their husbands, any obligations of the daughters-in-law toward Naomi were immediately severed at that point. Were either to remarry, their husbands would have no obligation to take in or care for their former mother-in-law. In fact, it would have been considered highly irregular, unacceptable. Wouldn't have been done. Were either of them both to return to Bethlehem with Naomi, there would have been little to no prospect of either as Moabite widows taking Jewish husbands. They would together be largely destitute. When Naomi utters those words at the end of the chapter that she went away full, but the Lord had brought her back empty, she wasn't exaggerating. That wasn't just self-pity. It was absolutely true. It is that situation and those circumstances that make the account and the words which are recorded and which follow so stunning and powerful. We pick up at verse 6. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-laws prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and she set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. As I mentioned last week in our introduction to the theme of as I mentioned in our introduction, the theme of the book of Ruth is faithfulness. The faithfulness of God and the faithfulness of the main characters of the story. It is the Hebrew word which occurs peppered throughout the book, hesed, sometimes translated frequently to us who grew up with the King James as loving kindness or steadfast love. It's a hard word to translate completely because it has a deeper meaning than simply kindness, which is how the NIV translates it. I'm not sure why they do that. It's such a more all-encompassing, richer word, that word hesed. I offered this definition last week, meaning compassion. It has that sense. Commitment, it has that deep sense. That's why sometimes translated steadfast love. Compassion, commitment, born of unfailing, unwavering love. We're going to see that on display throughout the whole of the story, but it is on rich display at this beginning chapter. Both of Naomi's daughters-in-law set out to return with her. That's significant. As I said, there was no legal requirement to do so. There was no cultural expectation to do so. By doing so, both would be essentially abandoning whatever future they might have had. It is difficult to overstate the significance and the impact of that decision. They were going to go with her. Why would they do that? Hesed. Compassion, kindness, born of unwavering, unfailing love. That's why. In fact, notice that's exactly what Naomi says midway through verse 8 when she says to them, we'll come to this in a moment, may the Lord show you kindness, hesed, as you have shown kindness, hesed, to your dead husbands and to me. It was out of their deep compassion, kindness, love, devotion to their husbands, and their love and devotion to Naomi that they were willing to abandon themselves to a futureless future. It was devotion to their husbands and devotion to Naomi. So it's on display in them, but it's also on display in Naomi's response, verse 8. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord, Yahweh, in distinct contrast to the God of the Moabites, Chemosh, may the Lord show you kindness, hesed, as he has shown hesed to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. It was out of love and devotion that Naomi said to them, no. You need to return to your people. You have the whole of your lives ahead of you to be lived, and you cannot throw that away for me. I can't allow you to do that. It's difficult to overstate how significant that decision was, the import of it. Because understand that apart from them, Naomi had nothing and no one. She would be reduced to gleaning and donations. At least with them, she would have their company, their emotional support, and their labors as younger women, particularly as she grew old. So understand that Naomi was saying essentially goodbye to any visible, material, physical, emotional support that she might have had then or in her days to come. She was putting their future above her own. Why would she do that? Hesed, love and devotion, kindness and compassion, born of unwavering, unfailing love, regardless of the cost to her. By the way, notice how she did that. She waited till they were out of town, on their way out of town, on the road back to Judah. Why? Why'd she do that? To lessen the emotional pain and impact of what it would mean. It would not be her leaving their home, telling them goodbye from the doorsteps of their home. It would not be them sending her away from their home. It would be a parting of the ways. Go back. She sought in her love and kindness to make it as difficult as it was, to make it as least difficult as possible. Halfway through verse 9, then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go back with you and to your people. They said, no, don't even think about it. We're going with you. Which, by the way, shows the personal and spiritual impact that Naomi had had on those two young Moabite women. The deep love, the deep faith that she had modeled and demonstrated to them. Even at her urging, even given all of the import of that decision, they said, no, we're going with you. Verse 11, but Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there were still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. She does two things. She underscores the seriousness of her plight, the utter truth of the situation. That even the faintest possible prospect that she would have additional sons that they would wait for was never going to happen. She just pulled that out. And secondly, she will not allow the bitterness of her circumstances to compound to the bitterness of their circumstances. That is not going to happen. That's what Naomi was saying. So Hesed on display in the life of Naomi. And then Hesed on display in Ruth's response. Verse 14. As they wept aloud again, then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Let me just say, first of all, I think this is important to note, that the author of Ruth casts no aspersion upon Orpah for her return. None. It was the right and reasonable thing to do. It was the sincere desire and clearly expressed wish and determination of Naomi that she do so. There's no question in the text about that. However, it puts in starkest contrast the response of Ruth, doesn't it? Ruth had every opportunity and every reason to return. She had every opportunity and every reason to return. When Orpah kissed Naomi and turned and began to walk away, it would have been the most natural and convenient response for Ruth to kiss Naomi and to turn and join her. Instead, she clung to her. Why? Hesed. Care and compassion, born of unwavering, unfailing love. But why did Orpah determine initially to go with Naomi and refuse initially to turn back? That was Hesed also. No doubt about it. She packed her goods. She said, I'm going with you. When Naomi stopped them on the road and said, you need to go back and make homes for yourselves, they said, no, we're going with you. She was determined. That was Hesed as well. No doubt about it. But there was clearly a difference between the depth and quality of Hesed in the life of Orpah and that in the life of Ruth. In fact, I would suggest to you, submit to you, that the quality and depth of the Hesed demonstrated by Ruth exceeded not only the Hesed demonstrated by Orpah, it exceeded the Hesed demonstrated by Naomi. Naomi at least had reason on her side. These were young women who had the whole of their lives ahead of them. There was no good reason or purpose to compound the bitterness of her circumstances by making it theirs. But Ruth, in contrast, went against all of that. In spite of all of that. In spite of all reason, in spite of the permission, in spite of the encouragement, in spite of the expressed will, in spite of Orpah's return, in spite of everything and everyone. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. Words that echo through the halls of faith and history, don't they? Here's the question. Why? How come? Why the difference between the two Heseds? I think I can point to two reasons that I think are important to discern in what's taking place. Number one, first, there is a selflessness to Hesed. There is a selflessness. All three of them demonstrated selflessness, but to different degrees. That contrast is most apparent between Orpah and Ruth. Orpah demonstrated selflessness, but in the end, she chose her self-interest. She chose to return to her people and her gods. No aspersion cast, but that's the difference. Ruth's selflessness, in contrast, was on a different plane, in a different realm. The depth and degree of her hesed was expressed in the depth and degree of her selflessness, her utter abandonment to all self-interest and to all self-concern. That's what those words declared. Second, that selflessness was a direct result and product of her faith. The depth and degree of her selflessness was in direct proportion to the depth and degree of her faith. And that contrast is apparent even between her and Naomi. Notice these words back in verse 13 when she says to them, "No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." And then if you go down to verse 19, so the two women went on till they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Though Naomi could trust the Lord to show hesed toward Orpah and Ruth, and though she could acknowledge the hesed they had shown toward her, and though she could demonstrate hesed toward them, she could not yet acknowledge God's hesed toward herself. But Ruth's faith was on a different plane, a different realm. No fear, no regret, no woe, no apprehension, abandoned. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. No matter what else. No thought of herself. Instead, utter and complete abandonment to him and his care and his will, his hesed. Faith in his faithfulness, period. If you're familiar with the story, The Hiding Place, and I'm confident that you all are, if not, you should be. And by the way, I think it would be a good book to read in these days. It's been a long time since I read it, and I told Trish at breakfast this morning, we're gonna read that together. We're gonna read it together out loud. I think we need to hear it again in these days. If you're familiar with the story, you know that one of the threads that runs through that story is the faith and faithfulness of Betsy. that Corey could never quite grasp or comprehend. Was Corey a lady of faith? Was her life characterized by faithfulness? Absolutely. But there was a plane on which Betsy lived, a realm in which she was, Corey knew nothing of. And it was demonstrated in her utter selflessness. Her utter selflessness. She would not give a thought to giving their last whatever it was to someone else in need. She never had to pause to think. She never batted an eye. Whether it was a piece of life-giving nourishment or the last tiny dose of medicine rationed, or a blanket. Remember in the story when winter was coming to Ravensbrück and they distributed a blanket, a small blanket to each person? And a new prisoner came in and there were no more blankets and that prisoner was without one, and Betsy immediately turned to Corey and said, we need to give her one of our blankets. Didn't think about it. Not a thought. And Corey tells about the internal battle that was for her to do. And finally relenting to take her that blanket, but then handing her and saying, I will lend this to you. Do you get another one? I'm not giving it to you. I'll lend it to you. And the next day when she gathered their circle of women around in the barrack to have her Bible study, she felt absolute powerlessness and no joy until she repented of her selfishness to hang on. Betsy was someplace different. And that wasn't just the product of different personalities, different wiring, somebody that's generous versus someone that's practical. It was much deeper than that. What became clear to Corey is that Betsy's selflessness was born of a faith of which Corey knew nothing. Well, let me put it a different way. Of a faith at a realm or in a plane that Corey did not know. That would be the more accurate way to say it. That abandonment demonstrated in her selflessness toward others, I'm talking about Betsy, was the direct result and product of her complete abandonment to the care and will of God, to his love and his faithfulness, his hesed. And because Corey had not yet there arrived, in that complete abandonment to his hesed, she couldn't demonstrate the same kind of hesed. You remember when they make the transport to Ravensbrück and they're packed into cattle cars like cattle, and they take this long journey, and when they get there and they are absolutely, utterly spent and exhausted, and they finally get into their barracks and crawl up onto that barrack, and then suddenly they lay there and realize that there's fleas in the mattress. And it's more than Corey can take. And Betsy closes her eyes and says, oh, Lord, thank you for watching over us. Thank you for keeping us. Thank you for bringing us here. And though we don't understand it, we thank you for these fleas. That's more than Corey can take at that moment. She just can't handle it anymore. There was an abandonment to the loving care, wisdom, and will of God that was at a plane that Corrie had not yet arrived. Then the beautiful, remember later, not long before she dies, when Betsy comes to the information, she finds out that the reason that the guards won't come into the barrack, which was unknown to them, and why they were allowed free course for their ministry with all of these women, was because of the fleas. They were free to share the scriptures and to teach their Bible studies and to minister to these women because of that. It was because of Betsy's absolute trust, born of an absolute confidence in God's absolute love and faithfulness. Her hesed was the product of her faith in his hesed. The depth and degree of her hesed was the direct result of the depth and degree of her faith, her trust in his hesed. Does that slay you? Slays me. Slays me. The same was true of Ruth. She was at a different plane. And we'll see that evidence throughout the story and how it impacts Naomi. Our demonstration of hesed is in direct proportion to our faith, the degree and depth of our faith, and his hesed, our faith and his faithfulness. There is a selflessness and a generosity that is only possible in the abandonment of ourselves to God's faithfulness. Let me say that one more time. There is a selflessness and a generosity that is only possible in the abandonment of ourselves to God's faithfulness. It is not that generosity doesn't exist. It's not that selflessness isn't demonstrated. It is, and thank God for that. I've spent quite a number of years working with healthcare professionals when I was in college, and then 10 years in the medical command in the Army and deployed at a major Army hospital. Let me tell you about the selflessness of those frontline health workers. Difficult to describe, to tell you the truth. Those people that are flying to hot spots in the country, knowing that over 1,000 of their healthcare workers have given their lives, that's selfless. The volunteers that are standing out for hours on time to pass out food to those who are experiencing food insecurity, that's pretty selfless. And thank God for that. But there is an unusual selflessness and generosity that is only the product of unusual faith. And I would say this humbly and self-critically, that doesn't seem to be an abundant supply today, yet, among those who name his name. We seem just as preoccupied as those around us with our losses and our comforts and our rights and our freedoms, what we need, what we're going to have, no matter the cost or impact on others. Shocking. It's shocking. We can come up with all kinds of rationalizations. By the way, if you remember in the story, Corrie did. When she would ace her way into the middle of their formation early in the morning so that it would be warmer rather than standing on the exteriors of a formation. Those of you who've had to do that know that's the cold place to be. She'd make her way. Her justification was to protect Betsy and because of how important they were in terms of their ministry to these other women, until God rebuked her for all of that. We need to ask ourselves, is this really for others? Is it really? Or is this really about me? Is this compassion, true compassion and commitment born of unfailing, unwavering love for others? Or is this self-interest wrapped in a proof text of Scripture sometimes? These are important days. They will reveal the true nature, depth, and quality of our faith by how we respond and what we become. They are days when true Hesed can be demonstrated, but that is not a given, not automatic. Let me close with this. This is Eugene Peterson's translation of James 1 and 2. And it's such an appropriate word. Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when test. Let me read this. I want you to hear the import of it. Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work. So you become mature and well developed, not deficient in any way. There's something to tuck into your pocket as aspirational for these days in which we live. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we